A widow millionaire caught her gardener barbecuing with her kids. Her reaction changed everything. Emily Carter's home was once filled with laughter, the scent of freshly baked bread, and sunlit Sunday afternoons. But ever since James, her husband, was taken away in a tragic car accident, everything changed. Suddenly, brutally, and silently. Nestled in the quiet countryside of Vermont, the classic-style estate now felt frozen in summer. The windows remained open, but no light dared to enter. The thick curtains stayed drawn. The grand piano that used to echo through the house every weekend had been covered with a white sheet. Emily hadn't touched it since. No one had. Lucas, age 9, and Sophia, just 6, seemed like ghosts in their own home. They no longer laughed, barely spoke, and refused to meet their mother's eyes. Lucas, once the spark of the household, sat alone for hours with his old toy car. Sophia clung to her ragdoll like it was the only thread holding her to memory. Dinner had become a silent battleground. Emily still set the long table for 3, but she was the only one trying to swallow spoonfuls of soup through quiet tears. Lucas stirred his fork aimlessly. Sophia refused anything but plain crackers. "Mom, can I leave the table?" Lucas whispered on the 4th consecutive evening, without eating. Emily nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. She had once been strong, successful even, running a chain of organic markets. But now Emily was simply a mother trying to make it through the day. She kept telling herself, "I have to be strong for them. I can't fall apart." But that strength had started to feel like a mask, thin, cracking, because inside, her heart was already broken. No one visited anymore. The Sunday gatherings James used to host, filled with laughter, grilling steaks, and the clinking of wine glasses, had become a painful memory. The kitchen stayed cold, the garden behind the house wilted from neglect, and yet, through all the heaviness, one figure still showed up every morning. Daniel Cooper, the quiet gardener. He was never loud, never late, always in a faded shirt, worn boots, and a baseball cap pulled low. He knew the garden by heart, the roses James had planted, the swing he'd hung for Lucas. Daniel didn't talk much. He only gave a polite nod to Emily whenever she passed by the balcony, then returned to his work in silence. And somehow Emily appreciated that silence. No questions, no pity, no pressure to move on. That morning, the sky was painted a dull shade of gray, casting a muted gloom over Emily's backyard. The grass had grown wild, flowers drooped lifelessly, and Lucas's old swing creaked in the wind, like a memory refusing to fade. Daniel entered through the small wooden gate behind the house, just as he had every morning for the past 8 months. He carried a toolbox, wore his faded cap, and bore hands calloused from soil and morning dew. He wasn't a professional gardener. Once a chef in a small city diner, Daniel had left that life behind after his own personal loss. Vermont became his quiet retreat, and tending gardens gave him peace. Emily hired him not for his resume, but for his silence and reliability. While cleaning a storage room, Daniel found a forgotten object in the corner, an old dusty grill. Beside it was a wooden box containing dried spices and a note written in a man's handwriting. "Sunday is family barbecue day." He sighed, remembering his former boss, James, a cheerful man who gathered family and friends every Sunday in the garden. Simple meat, charcoal-grilled bread, laughter echoing through the whole street. Now the grill stood like a monument to silence. Daniel brushed his hand over the lid of the grill and thought, could this be what the house is missing to awaken? He gathered some dry wood, lit a small fire like a sacred ritual. No one had asked him to. No one knew. But as the flames rose and the smoke drifted into the crisp autumn air, Daniel felt a quiet presence smiling down. He wasn't planning a feast, just a few slices of stale bread, a bit of butter, some minced garlic. The smell floated through the air, mingling with the soft crackle of the firewood. He didn't call anyone, But somehow the children heard. Sophia appeared first. She stood at the glass door, still clutching her rag doll. Her eyes were wide, her little nose twitching. Daniel didn't turn around. He just said gently, "Want to try a piece?" There was no reply, just the quiet grumble of a small stomach. He sliced the bread, placed it on a small tin plate, and set it on the wooden bench nearby. No pressure, no direct gaze. "If you don't like it, that's okay." Sophia glanced around, then slowly stepped forward. Her tiny feet made soft taps on the cold stone. She reached out, took the bread, and bit into it. The sound of the crunchy crust shattered the silence that had haunted the house for months. Upstairs, Lucas watched the scene through the window. He couldn't believe his eyes. His sister was eating after all this time. Curiosity triumphed over indifference. He slid open the glass door and stepped out slowly. "What about me?" he asked, still hesitant. Daniel smiled. He placed another loaf on the grill, this time brushing it with a little butter. "There's room here for everyone." Lucas sat down on the ground beside Max, who wagged his tail like in the old days. As he bit into the bread, he let out a deep, satisfied sigh. "Just like Dad's." The words echoed through the garden. Sophia's eyes widened, astonished at her brother's courage. Since their father's death, his name had never been spoken. Emily had imposed silence, thinking it would shield the children from pain. Daniel didn't flinch. He only nodded gently, with respect. "Yes, your father loved Sunday gatherings, didn't he?" Lucas nodded, mouth still full. Then he did something no one expected. He stood up, went into the storage room, and came back with a bundle of dried rosemary, the herb their father James always used for seasoning the meat. Lucas handed it to Daniel. "Dad said grilling without rosemary wasn't any fun." Daniel accepted the herbs as though receiving a treasure. He sprinkled them over the simple cuts of meat he had bought with his own money. The aroma spread through the air, richer, more familiar. Sophia closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. A tear rolled down, but it wasn't just sorrow. It was a living memory. Daniel gently planted another seed. "You know, Emily isn't here right now, but let me tell you, in the Bible, when Jesus rose again, the very first thing he did was build a fire to cook breakfast for his friends. Not meat, but fish. Yet still, it was fire, a table, a family gathered." Lucas and Sophia listened intently, chewing slowly. "Do you think Jesus knew his disciples were sad?" Daniel asked. "Yes," Lucas whispered. "That's right. He didn't preach. He didn't lecture. He just built a fire, set out a simple meal, and said, 'Come and eat.' Families need to gather, to share warmth, food, and hope. But someone at the kitchen window had just heard every word and was not at all pleased. Vera, the longtime housekeeper, angrily yanked the curtain shut. Her face flushed red. She strode firmly to the phone, muttering, "Nonsense! That's not how you care for traumatized children." While she called Emily, another scene unfolded in the garden. Lucas licked his greasy fingers. Sophia giggled as she shared bread with Max. Daniel watched with calm eyes, knowing he was touching something very deep. Emily's phone rang. Emily answered. On the other end, Vera's voice shook with fury. "Mrs. Emily, you must come home at once. The gardener is grilling with the children." "This will only traumatize them further." Emily froze, holding the phone. Her heart pounded. She didn't know it yet, but that call marked the beginning of the most important decision of her life. Outside, the smoke rose like a forgotten invitation. The scent of rosemary meat mingled with garlic bread, filling the air with memory. It was impossible not to feel something ancient being awakened. Lucas ate hungrily, something he hadn't done in 8 months. With each bite, his plate grew cleaner. Daniel watched quietly, letting the fire and the food do their silent work. Sophia, once so timid, now had her mouth full of bread, her eyes sparkling. For the first time, she didn't want to let go of her rag doll, yet she also couldn't release the crispy bread. She held one in each hand, as if both were her anchors and her discoveries. "Is it good?" Daniel asked simply. Sophia nodded eagerly, still chewing. As for Lucas, he swallowed quickly, then held out his empty plate. "Is there more?" For the first time in 8 months, he asked for food. Daniel refilled the plate, but in his heart he knew this wasn't just hunger. It was longing. Yet someone still watched from the window, and what she saw made her blood boil. Vera angrily yanked the curtain again. To her, it was an offense. "Playing with the master's memory through barbecue? This will destroy the children," she muttered. She returned to the phone, insisting to Emily, "Come home immediately. That gardener is meddling with things that should not be touched. Everything will get worse." Emily took a deep breath on the other end. Her heart tightened. A mother's instinct pulled one way, while the fear of making another mistake dragged her the other. She hung up without answering. Meanwhile, in the garden, life was stirring once more. Lucas wiped his greasy hands on his shirt, something he had never done before. He laughed when a streak of oil slid down. Dad always said if you don't get messy while grilling, then it's not grilling. Sophia looked at him, surprised. Since their father's death, the word Dad had been forbidden, but around the charcoal fire, it suddenly felt natural. "Did Dad really say that?" she whispered, her voice as thin as the wind. Daniel calmly seized the moment. "What would you say if I told you that even Jesus used fire to gather those who were sad?" he asked while adjusting the grill. The children looked at him curiously. Lucas frowned. "So Jesus grilled too?" Daniel chuckled softly. "Grilled fish, but the meaning is the same. Families need to gather around the fire. That's where we remember who we are." Sophia hugged her doll to her chest and whispered, "I want Dad to come back." Silence fell for a few seconds. Daniel didn't rush to answer. He placed a small piece of meat on her plate, then said, "Your father won't come back, Princess, but his love is still here. In this aroma, in this bread, in the way you remember him. Love doesn't die. It just changes shape." Sophia bit into the meat, tears falling, but her smile unbroken. They didn't know that behind them, someone was stepping into the garden. Emily had decided to come home earlier than planned. She entered through the side gate, her heels sinking softly into the grass. She didn't yet know what she would see, but Vera's words still rang in her ears. As she drew closer, the smell of grilled meat hit her strongly. Her heart raced. It was the smell of those Sunday afternoons with James. For months that smell had been forbidden, every memory of her husband cut like a knife. But now, as she inhaled it, something inside her softened and trembled. Emily stopped at the garden entrance and saw the scene. Lucas, his mouth still full, asked for more. Sophia giggled softly, her hands smeared. Daniel calmly flipped the meat. Her blood ran cold and hot at once. "What is happening here?" she asked, her voice firm yet breaking. The two children turned. Lucas reacted first. He held up a piece of bread. "Mom, it tastes like Dad's Sundays." Emily felt her legs about to buckle. She didn't know whether to cry, to scold, or to embrace her child. But she had to decide at that very moment. She took a deep breath at the edge of the garden, her hands still trembling. The contrast before her left her paralyzed. On one side was the simple wooden table Daniel had just set up. On the other was Lucas's radiant smile and Sophia's sparkling eyes. The fire crackled, embers drifting like glitter in the air. "What is going on here?" Her voice rose higher than she intended. The two children recoiled for a moment, but Lucas immediately stepped forward. In his hand was a piece of bread with a charred edge. "Mom, it tastes like Dad's Sundays." The words struck Emily's chest like lightning. Her heart tightened. For 8 months, she hadn't heard her children speak their father's name. That silence was a rule she herself had imposed, thinking it would protect them. But now, silence was broken by a child, and she didn't know if it was a blessing or a curse. "Who permitted this?" Emily repeated, staring directly at Daniel. The gardener wiped his hands on his makeshift apron, not bowing his head. "I didn't ask for permission, Mrs. Emily. The children smelled the food and came on their own. I only lit the fire." Emily frowned. "You don't understand, Daniel. They are fragile. Any trigger could shatter what little piece remains." Daniel drew a deep breath. His eyes were steady but warm. "I respect your pain, but pain isn't healed by silence. Even when the Lord rose again, he did not deliver a sermon. He lit a fire, placed fish on the coals, and invited his friends. Come and eat. He pointed at Lucas and Sophia. These 2 little ones need that. They need to taste life again. Lucas looked at his mother, eyes pleading. Sophia, lips greasy, clutched her piece of meat like a treasure. The ground beneath Emily seemed to slip away, but before she could respond, a voice cut through the air like a knife. "Mrs. Emily!" Vera, the housekeeper, rushed forward. "I warned you. This gardener is irresponsible. In broad daylight, grilling and stirring the children's memories. This is outrageous." Lucas shrank back. Sophia clung to her mother's dress, frightened. The fragile lightness in the air suddenly shattered. "Enough, Vera." Emily raised a hand to calm things, but Daniel did not retreat. "With respect, ma'am, what's truly outrageous is 2 children going 8 months without laughter. Today, for the first time, this plate is clean." He pointed to Lucas's plate, spotless as never before. Emily swallowed hard. It was true, but Vera refused to accept it. The tension soared. "Children don't need fire and smoke," Vera insisted. "They need discipline. They need to forget what happened. If we keep reminding them of their dead father, they will never move on." Lucas stepped forward, trembling. "I don't want to forget Dad." Everything went still. It was the first time he had spoken up in months. Sophia sobbed, nodding. "We just want to remember Dad," without being sad. Emily covered her face with her hand. Tears flowed. Her heart was torn between 2 forces, the fear of wounding her children further and the relief of seeing them finally respond. Daniel, steady but gentle, added, "Mrs. Emily, the fire here is not just charcoal. It is memory. It is faith. As it is written, 'The joy of the Lord is our strength.' If you allow it, these Sundays can become sacred again for your family." Emily looked at her children. The contrast was undeniable. Before, they were like 2 ghosts. Now, they were children with eyes full of light. But she had to choose, right here before the fire. Emily took a deep breath and slowly approached the grill. Daniel stepped back, offering the tongs with a piece of meat just done. "Would you like to taste it?" Emily's hand trembled. She looked at the simple piece of meat. It was not a lavish banquet. There was no famous chef, just meat with rosemary, toasted bread, and smoke. But when the aroma touched her, memories of James laughing around the grill rushed back. She took a small bite, closed her eyes, and let tears flow freely. "It's the same flavor," she whispered, "the flavor of Sundays with him." Lucas beamed. Sophia clapped joyfully. Vera backed away, furious. "Mrs. Emily, you cannot be this weak. You will lose control of this house." Emily turned, her voice broken yet firm. "I have already lost too much, Vera. What I will not lose again is my children's smiles." The silence that followed was no longer sorrowful. It was decisive. Emily didn't know it yet, but in that moment, she had set the beginning of a new tradition that would change the family forever. The sun was setting over Vermont. Its last rays shone through the smoke still lingering above the grill. The scent of rosemary meat, toasted bread, and burning coals was suddenly transformed. It was no longer just food. It was living memory. Emily stepped away from the grill, her heart still racing. That single bite had brought back James's laughter in this very garden. For months she had tried to erase every scent, every melody, every detail that reminded her of her husband. Now, in an instant, everything returned in full force. Lucas and Sophia kept eating eagerly, as if true hunger had finally awakened. Lucas's plate was clean for the second time. Sophia, who had clung to her rag doll for 8 months, now set it aside to hold the loaf with both hands. Emily looked at her children through tears, but deep inside fear still lingered. What if this new beginning was only an illusion? Daniel put out the fire, then walked back slowly, respecting her space. His hand still carried the scent of smoke. "Mrs. Emily," he said gently, "I know you weren't expecting this today. But sometimes what we need most isn't found in the luxury of the mansion, but in the simplicity of the backyard." She took a deep breath, restraining her emotions. "I'm just afraid, Daniel. Afraid this will bring more pain. My children have stayed silent about their father for months. I fear that remembering will only reopen the wound." Daniel nodded with empathy, sitting on the wooden bench, motioning lightly for her to sit too. "Forgive my bluntness, Mrs. Emily, but it is not silence that heals. It is love. Longing doesn't vanish when we hide it. It transforms when we learn how to season it." Emily sat beside him, still hesitant. "Season longing? What do you mean?" Daniel looked at the dying embers. Like unseasoned meat, tough and bitter, raw longing cuts and hurts. But when we season it with faith, with good memories, with gratitude, it's still there, but no longer bitter. It becomes nourishment. The simple words struck Emily's heart. Before she could respond, Lucas came running with something in his hands. He clutched a worn notebook. Panting, he held it out. "I found this in the storage, Mom. Dad's recipe book." Emily's eyes widened. For months she hadn't seen it. James had written every detail of their Sunday barbecues, even the children's preferences. Lucas carefully flipped a page. "Look, Mom, it says, 'Lucas likes his meat well done.' And here, Sophia likes corn roasted on the coals." Sophia stepped closer, smiling as she saw her name. Dad remembered us in everything. Emily couldn't hold back. She embraced them both, sobbing. "I thought that by erasing memories you would hurt less, but I was wrong." Daniel, still seated, added firmly, "Healing doesn't come by erasing, but by remembering with love. That's also what the Lord taught." When he broke the bread, he said, "Do this in remembrance of me." Not to forget, but to remember in faith. Silence fell, but it was no longer the silence of a grave. It was one of reflection. And Emily suddenly understood what would change the life of her household forever. She looked at the wooden bench, the extinguished grill, the notebook in her son's hands. She realized the house didn't need to be a museum of sorrow. It could become an altar of living memory. She turned to Daniel, her eyes still full of tears. "Do you think James would be pleased?" Daniel did not hesitate. "I'm sure, because his legacy wasn't only wealth, it was family. And family needs a full table, the warmth of food, and faith around the fire." Lucas nodded eagerly. "Mom, let's have a barbecue every Sunday like Dad did." Sophia clapped her hands. "And let's pray too, like Daniel said Jesus did." Emily smiled through her tears. The sight of her children asking for food and prayer stood in stark contrast to months of silence. "If you want it, we'll do it every Sunday." Sunday closed under an orange sky. A light breeze drifted through the Carter garden, carrying the scent of fading charcoal. Emily walked slowly across the grass, watching her children run around Daniel. For the first time in months, Lucas and Sophia played outdoors. Their laughter shattered the silence that had turned the mansion into a tomb. To Emily, every sound, even Max's barking or the rustle of dry leaves being kicked, was music. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. She felt James's presence, not as a ghost, but as a living memory, warming in every gesture of her children. When she opened her eyes, she saw Vera standing on the porch, her gaze disapproving. "Mrs. Emily," Vera began, her voice low but firm, "this isn't good. Mr. James is gone. Reviving those Sundays will only confuse the children more." Emily drew a deep breath. She was still afraid, but inside her a new strength had formed. "Vera, for 8 months I followed your rules. The result was full plates and empty children. Today, for the first time, I saw them laugh, saw Lucas ask for more food. I saw Sophia set aside her doll to feed herself. Don't ask me to give that up." Vera bit her lip, then stepped back. Daniel, who had overheard part of it, approached respectfully. "May I suggest something?" Emily turned to him, curious. "Why don't we set the table right here in the garden? After all, everything began here." The fire, the bread, the meat, and the faith. You said you wanted your children to remember with love, not with pain. Then let this table be the altar of memory. Emily looked around. The grand dining table inside the house had only ever been tied to sorrow. But the idea of a rustic table beneath the open sky sounded like freedom. "Let's try it," she answered, though still hesitant. Daniel pulled a wooden table from against the shed wall, dusty but sturdy. Lucas ran off to fetch chairs. Sophia picked flowers in the garden. Max barked excitedly, as if helping too. Emily watched quietly. A new kind of beauty emerged, not the elegance of fine porcelain, but the innocence of small hands joyfully preparing a meal. Daniel spread a simple cloth, placing James's recipe book at the center. "This book is our family's compass. One recipe each Sunday, one memory each Sunday." Emily came closer, caressing the worn cover. Tears welled again. "James always said, 'Cooking is loving through aroma and taste.'" Daniel smiled. "Then today, let's love that way." But before they began the meal, Daniel did something that surprised Emily and the children. He removed his cap and bowed his head. "Before we eat, let's give thanks." The children looked at each other. They weren't used to praying before meals. Emily hesitated too, but Daniel calmly continued. "The Lord did so with his disciples. He broke the bread, gave thanks, and said, 'Do this in remembrance of me.' Today we do this in remembrance of James." Lucas, moved, held his mother's hand. Sophia laid her tiny hand on Daniel's. "Father, thank you for the bread, for the meat, for this family, and for memories that do not die." Daniel prayed simply. "Let this Sunday be the beginning of many more Sundays." Emily wept, for the first time in months, with tears of gratitude, not despair. The following Sunday arrived with golden sunlight, a gentle breeze, and the scattered sounds of laughter from the backyard. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew something had changed forever. Daniel came early, carrying a bag of fresh vegetables from the local farmer's market. He wore his old pale blue shirt, sleeves rolled up, and started lighting the fire as if it was something he'd done his entire life. But this time, he wasn't alone. Lucas stood beside him, holding a bunch of rosemary from the garden. Daniel showed him how to break the sprigs, rub them between his palms to release the scent. Sophia sat on the back steps, wearing a small apron Emily had sewn from old fabric, folding napkins into little heart shapes. Emily watched from the balcony, a cup of tea in hand, but her gaze was fixed not on the drink, but on every small action outside. Eyes that had only stared into emptiness for the past 8 months now followed every movement with quiet awe. Daniel didn't teach like an adult. He guided with patience. He let Lucas try, make mistakes, even smiled softly when the boy dropped the herbs onto the ground. Sophia rushed to help, and they both giggled when Max snuck a lick of butter from the dish. That day's meal was simple: grilled corn, garlic bread, and a bit of rosemary-seasoned meat. But each dish carried more than just flavor. It carried memory and love. Before they ate, Daniel gently placed an old notebook Lucas had found in the shed onto the table. "Today we cook from James's recipe," he said. Emily's eyes welled up as she recognized her husband's handwriting on the yellowed page. "James used to say, 'Cooking is how we turn love into something people can touch.'" The table under the maple tree was modest: 4 chairs, a faded cloth, a jar of hand-picked flowers from Sophia. But it was filled with warmth. Lucas sat next to Daniel. Sophia clung to her mother, her tiny fingers grasping Emily's hand beneath the table. As they bowed their heads in prayer, Emily opened her eyes for a brief moment and looked around. Where there had once been only grief, there was now life. Daniel ended the prayer in a quiet, reverent voice. "Thank you, Lord, for this meal, for these memories, and for new beginnings." All 4 echoed, "Amen," and soon the sounds of laughter, clinking silverware, and the smell of smoke filled the backyard once more. After the meal, Emily lingered at the table while the children chased Max across the lawn. Daniel was tidying up, but when he noticed her sitting quietly, he walked over slowly. "You okay?" Emily nodded, then said softly, "I never thought sitting with memories could feel this light." Daniel didn't reply, just sat beside her. They both looked toward the children as if the future was running barefoot right in front of them. A long moment passed, and for the first time Emily turned to Daniel, not just with gratitude, but with the eyes of a woman beginning to believe that peace could return. A full year had passed since that first barbecue. Every Sunday, the garden glowed with fairy lights, the scent of garlic bread, grilled meat, and laughter. Emily and Daniel never rushed. They tended to the garden together, fixed the old swing, and read James's recipe book with the kids. No promises made in haste, just shared moments, slowly building a love that was steady and deep. Sophia first called him Mr. Dan, then Uncle Dan, and finally Dad Dan, as naturally as breathing. And then, on a clear Sunday in June, Daniel did what he had quietly waited a whole year to do. That Sunday, the garden bloomed brighter than ever. Sophia carefully arranged wild daisies around the long wooden table, while Lucas ran back and forth, helping Daniel light the grill. Emily sat by the porch, gently brushing dust off the worn recipe book. Each week had been a step forward, a quiet miracle of rebirth. Emily appeared, wearing a simple white dress, her hair softly braided. Everyone paused for a second, as if she brought a glow with her. Daniel looked at her from the grill, unable to hide his smile. His heart raced. The lunch went on like every Sunday: garlic bread, rosemary marinated meat, and laughter filling the garden. But today, something felt different. An air of anticipation gently stirred the leaves. As the main dish finished, Daniel stood up. He wiped his hands on his apron, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. "Everyone," he said, voice slightly trembling, "today, I want to serve something not on the menu." All eyes turned to him. Emily watched, curious. Daniel turned to Emily and knelt down. "You brought light back into a place that had forgotten how to shine. You didn't just heal 2 children, you healed my heart. And if James were here, I believe he'd be smiling." Emily covered her mouth, tears already forming. "Emily Carter, will you marry me?" Silence held the air. Then Sophia shouted, "Mom, say yes!" Laughter echoed. Emily nodded, tears streaming. "Yes, I will." Applause rippled through the garden. Vera, standing behind, nodded gently, her hands joining in the celebration. A week later, the wedding was held in that very garden. No grand gown, no loud music, just birdsong, garlic bread, and familiar grilled meat. Emily walked toward Daniel under the trees, the kids walking ahead with little flower bundles. The pastor stood by the wooden table, now their family altar, and offered blessings. As the rings were exchanged, Sophia whispered, "Dad is definitely watching." Emily squeezed Daniel's hand. To her, he was no longer the gardener. He was the man she loved, the father of her children, her forever companion through sunshine and storms. The wedding ended with a quiet prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for a fire that never dies." The four of them embraced. No more gray days. Only light, toasted bread, and love, whole and eternal.